Whether you have any interest in moral philosophy or not, you have probably heard of a famous thought experiment called the trolley problem. Imagine there is a runaway trolley barreling down the railway tracks. Ahead on the tracks, there are 5 people tied up and are unable to move. The trolley is headed straight for them. You are standing next to a lever. You have 2, and only 2 options. First, do nothing, in which case the trolley will kill the 5 people on the main track. Or 2, pull the lever, diverting the trolley onto the side track, where it will kill 1 person. Which is the more ethical option? Or more simply, what is the right thing to do? According to a normative ethical theory called deontology, which was most famously advocated by Immanuel Kant, option 1 is the right choice. Deontology is the theory that certain rules determine whether an action is good or bad. So applying it to the specific scenario, no matter how many people that action may save, killing a person is always morally wrong. Therefore, one should never pull the lever. According to another ethical theory called consequentialism, option 2 is the right choice. Just as the name suggests, consequentialism holds that the consequences of the actions determine whether the action is right or wrong. Specifically for the trolley problem, a certain type of consequentialism is worth noting, called utilitarianism, which was most famously advocated by John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism holds that whatever action bring about the most happiness or greater good is the morally right action. There have been countless other ethical dilemmas which philosophers have proposed and argued about, and there are countless modified versions of the trolley problem, such as the fat man variant, a scenario where you have to push a fat man who is big enough to stop the train onto the train tracks in order to stop the train. There is also the famous transplant problem, where a doctor tells you that there are 5 other doctors who are in need of transplants in order to survive, and that miraculously, you have the perfect body to be able to help these doctors. Is the surgeon wrong in killing you to use your organs, so that he can save the 5 doctors? Not just these, but numerous ethical dilemmas have been made thanks to the internet. But a common criticism a lot of these ethical dilemmas get is, isn't this just the modified trolley problem? However, in reality, pretty much all moral dilemmas are in fact modified trolley problems. In essence, most of these thought experiments rest on the decision between whether one should commit an intuitively immoral action in order to potentially provide a greater, more desirable outcome. And this is when it all finally relates to Attack on Titan. Something I picked up right on my first read-through of Attack on Titan were the ways our main characters were constantly challenged in facing these ethical dilemmas. Countless times in the story, right from the very early parts, Eren and the rest of the crew are faced with modified trolley problems of their own, where they must commit an intuitively immoral action in order to hopefully achieve something greater. And it goes without saying that there are certain ethical theories that the overall narrative seems to favour over the other. Especially in the first half of the story, something close to utilitarianism seems to be endorsed over and over again. But one factor that makes Attack on Titan interesting is that the story itself also shows the flaws and the negative sides to this utilitarian perspective, as well as other ideologies different characters fight under. The female Titan arc, which took place in season 1 of the anime, was one of the first places this utilitarian idea and its flaws were established. This idea of sacrificing one's own life for the greater good of humanity is stated right from the get-go of this arc. When the trainees are called in for the introduction of the Survey Corps, Commander Erwin gives a speech that clearly pushes this sort of greater good idea. He doesn't hide the fact that 90% of the scouting legions had died in the past 4 years, and that even in his most optimistic estimates, it'll take at least 5 times more soldiers and 20 more years to reclaim Wall Maria again. However, Erwin states that this is all just a cost for ensuring mankind's survival, so in the end, all these sacrifices and losses of life may be worth it. Although Minnie leaves after hearing this declaration, the main characters decide to stay, and officially join the Survey Corps. The first time Eren was actively confronted with this dilemma was in the forest scene, which took place soon afterwards. As the female Titan aggressively chased after Squad Levi through the forest, and inched closer and closer to them, some of the backout soldiers begin attacking the Titan. However, they are no match for it and get swatted over like flies. Despite this ongoing threat, Levi gives everyone the order to keep pushing forward no matter what. Being at the center of all of this, Eren is placed in his own sort of trolley problem. He feels the impulse to ignore Levi's command and to help out these backout scouts by transforming into a Titan. but the rest of the squad urges Eren to listen to Levi and trust his command. He is put into a situation where he must commit an intuitively immoral act, to keep listening to Levi and leave his comrades to die, so that it could potentially lead to a better consequence in the end. Eren does end up listening to Levi, and at least for a moment, it seems to him like it was the right decision. It turned out that Levi had planned to ambush the Titan all along, and they succeed in luring her into a trap and capturing her alive. Straight after this, both Armin and the squad have a similar conversation that endorses this utilitarian viewpoint. As Armin and Jean wait for their next order, Armin states that there does come a time where you would have to make that choice, even when the results are unknowable. He goes on to pretty much summarize this utilitarian ideology.
大して長くも生きてないけど、確信していることがあるんだ。何かを変えることのできる人間がいるとすれば、その人はきっと大事なものを捨てることができる人だ。化け物をもしのぐ必要に迫られたのなら、人間性をも捨て去ることができる人のことだ。何も捨てることができない人には、何も変えることはできないだろう。
At the same time, the other members of Squad Levi also affirm this viewpoint. Petra tells Eren that their success was a result of him trusting and believing the others, and that making the right choice is always difficult. However, just as Armin and the whole squad continue to affirm this idea, out of nowhere, Gunther gets killed and the female Titan reappears. The Titan seems to be going after Eren. The rest of the squad immediately starts fighting the monster, and Eren tells the others that he will stay behind and fight the Titan with them. However, the rest of the group pleads with him to keep running and stay out of the battle. Once again, Eren is placed in a dilemma. This time around, he obeys these orders immediately, trusting his group's decision. But even the Special Operations Squad are no match for the monster, and they are each hunted down one by one. When Eren notices that everyone had been brutally killed, a switch within him turns on. He immediately regrets the way he had trusted his comrades, and he says that he should have believed himself from the beginning. So he proceeds to transform into a Titan. The way these events unfold is interesting, because this utilitarian idea is promoted constantly, again and again. But out of nowhere, the whole plan backfires, and Eren is immediately left to re-question and regret these actions. The ironic part is that Levi, the person who gave Eren these orders in the first place, was one of the only people who pointed out one of the problems with this utilitarian viewpoint. Back when Eren was in the tense position where he contemplated whether to transform into a Titan to save the backout scouts, Levi simply tells him that he's not in the wrong about this, and that if he wants to do it, he should do it. Levi accepts that Eren is too stubborn to control, and that it's ultimately his own choice whether he trusts himself or the whole scouting legion. This is when he says an extremely important line. In this dialogue, Levi brings up one big problem with this consequentialist mode of thinking. It is the simple fact that no matter how hard we think about a situation, we can never fully account or predict the actual consequences of our actions. And this is directly shown through what the squad's efforts amounted to. Given their circumstances, Eren and the rest of the squad thought they had made the right decision, but in the end, most of the group ended up being wiped out, and the Titan wasn't even captured as originally planned. The only non-negative result was the fact that Eren got out alive in the end. This section of the story is important because it showed both the good and bad sides of this utilitarian viewpoint. It first showed how this mode of thinking can lead you to make sacrifices in hopes of leading it to a greater good. But it later showed off the simple fact that even if one makes these sacrifices, we can never be sure whether it will lead to a better outcome. Until this point in the story, this ideology had been taken for granted by the government and by the other important characters, but the female Titan arc showed that it was by no means some perfect, just system. But this benefit for mankind narrative gets completely diminished at the end of Season 2. After recapturing Wall Maria and unlocking Grisha's secret basement, Eren and the rest of the crew discover the truth about their world. They get a bold paradigm shift that completely changes their outlook on everything. It turned out that the world was much, much larger than they had originally imagined. In fact, there were different nations and races all around the world, beyond the walls and across the ocean. All this time, The Titans weren't the monsters who had nearly caused mankind's extinction. Instead, all of the attacks were pre-orchestrated by the real so-called enemies, who were the humans that resided across the ocean. This revelation gives these main characters a paradigm shift about their own placing in the world, and they are left to re-examine what exactly they are fighting for. The now weakened blanket statement to fight for all of humanity completely goes away. So instead, many of the main characters narrow their focus. They instead decide to fight for the survival of their own nation or their own race. However, despite this shift, many of the characters still hold on to a strong, consequentialist viewpoint. This shift in perspective is foreshadowed right before the time skip happens. When we see the true backstory of Grisha Yeager, we are yet again shown the scope of this messed up crux of this consequentialist viewpoint, but things get taken to an even further messed up extreme. After Zeke had snitched on his parents as being part of the Restorationists, Grisha and Dina get taken to Parody Island, where they are planned to be injected with the serum and turned into pure Titans. However, after witnessing his wife, Dina, transform, and just before he himself is about to be injected, one of the guards pushes Major Gross down the wall and transforms into a Titan himself. This person, named Kruger, turns out to be the Owl, the Aldean who hid himself within the Malians to pass on information for the Restorationists. Understandably, when Grisha finds out about this, he is immediately hostile towards Kruger's decisions. He waited all this time to reveal himself, and he feels that his wife, the person who actually had the royal blood, could have been saved as well. To this, Kruger completely admits and accepts the fact that he had tortured and turned thousands of Aldeans into Titans against their will, even to women and children. But that he truly believes that all these heinous acts were done for the sake of Aldea. Just like all the other major characters we have seen, Kruger abides by a principle that he will do immoral acts if it can lead to a greater good for his people in the future. Kruger's actions are highly relevant to a moral debate called intergenerational justice. This field mainly concerns itself with how much moral worth future individuals actually have. For example, if someone were to plant a landmine inside a field and it detonated 1,000 years later, resulting in another person losing their life, we would deem the act immoral, regardless of temporal remoteness. We intuitively believe that future people, even ones who do not yet exist, have at least some moral worth. The hard question here is, to what degree should we value future generations? Relating to this, philosopher Derek Parfit conjured up a moral paradox called the non-identity problem, which concerns itself with this very problem that we can do immoral or moral acts without it directly affecting anyone who is alive right now. To completely disregard the importance of future generation seems immoral, yet completely overvaluing non-existent people also seems to be an equally outlandish idea. But the latter is exactly what Kruger does in this scene. For him, the lives of the future, non-existent Aldeans are much more important than any of the sentient Aldeans who are still alive. But in this scene, it is shown that he had taken it to a near radical level. He had tortured and killed the very same people he wanted to save. He saw all this as being a worthy sacrifice he had to take to liberate them one day in the distant future. Following this, Grisha gets ordered by Kruger to inherit the attack Titan and to infiltrate Parody to gain the power of the original Titan. However, Grisha says back that had he known that rebelling against the Malians would have resulted in him losing all his friends, his family, and having to suffer the pain of having all his fingers chopped off, for him to literally lose everything, he wouldn't have done any of it. To this, Kruger still tells him to stand up and go fight. He tells Grisha that had he not left the walls that day as a child, his sister wouldn't have been killed, and he wouldn't have become a restorationist in the first place. But the simple fact is that he did leave those walls. There is a sort of sunk cost fallacy type of thing going on here. Akin to the way Irwin piled up countless corpses of his own people to achieve his goal. Kruger had killed countless of his own people, and the only way he could redeem those lost lives was to keep moving forward, even if they die, and even after they die. This scene acts as a teaser for what the post-timeskip portion of the story continued to represent regarding this radical, extremist side of utilitarianism, showing how this greater good mindset can be taken to the extreme, really pushing the limits for what is morally permissible. The post-timeskip portion of Attack on Titan shows one specific flaw in this nationalistic herd mentality. The main characters continue to hold to an ideal to fight for their own nation or their own race, but one specific flaw in this mindset is showcased over and over again. As the war continues and the tensions between the countries continue to rise, characters like Gabby and Yelena keep affirming how they fight solely for their nation or their own race, and how they will do everything to benefit their own country. This type of thinking is not rare, and it exists in the real world and has existed for thousands of years. Generally speaking, the whole concept of nations or races are abstract. There are two philosophical ideas which are highly related to this. In his book Sapiens, historian Yuval Noah Harari explains how the whole concepts of businesses, companies, and even nations are pretty much shared fictional stories. For example, the whole USSR, as well as all other countries and nations, was just a non-existent story. This may sound a little strange at first, so let me explain. One question Harari would ask is, in what sense could we say that the USSR existed? Obviously, the people in the USSR was not the country itself. Even if a war took place and wiped out all the Soviet people at the time, it still does not entail that the USSR has gone away. Instead, the USSR was a figment of our shared imagination, which only existed inside our minds. This is why the USSR was not destroyed due to some war. It instead collapsed when Gorbachev signed it off on a piece of paper. Another figure who has talked about a similar idea is philosopher Sol Kripke. In his book, Philosophical Troubles, Collected Papers, he states that a nation exists if certain conditions are true about human beings and their relations. It may not be reducible to them because we cannot spell them out exactly, or perhaps without circularity. Kripke states a similar idea to Harari about how certain entities only exist within specific human relations. However, these concepts are just that, as Kripke describes, abstract entities. A nation or a race itself does not feel any emotions, pleasure or pain. Only the individuals within these concepts can actually experience these things. And fighting for these ideals ignores and overlooks the value, integrity, and autonomy of these individuals. This problem of nationalism is shown numerous times in Season 3 and 4. After discovering the real size of the world, Eren initially came to see the whole world outside of his walls as his enemies. But after infiltrating and living alongside the Malians, he discovers that while there were some cruel people, there were often good people as well. Eren himself says that contrary to what he initially believed, people are basically all the same, inside or outside the walls. Despite all this, he still holds on to this nationalistic mindset. He initiates a surprise attack upon the Malians, which kills countless innocent bystanders. He basically does the exact same thing Reiner and his crew had done when they attacked War Maria, the exact event which led all of this to happen. Eren doesn't hesitate to do this, because at this point in the story, he just sees this action as a means of ensuring more safety for his own people. He had completely rejected the belief which was represented at the start of the story, about how there is a moral equilibrium somewhere. To see this nationalistic idea being directly criticized, we need to look no further than the scene where Kaya and Gabby argue about who the real devils of the world are. After escaping from jail, Gabby and Falco get taken in by a kind family in the countryside, who coincidentally turns out to be Sasha's biological parents. As the Malian pair hide their identity and work alongside Kaya, she reveals that all the kids who live in their household are orphans who lost their parents in the Malian attack which took place 4 years ago. To this, Gabby argues back by saying that she speaks as if they've done nothing to deserve it. She continues to state that Kaya's people have committed countless atrocities and that they can never escape from their sins. However, Kaya then specifies the exact way her mother died right in front of her, and she simply asks, "What did my mother have anything to do with this?" Gabby keeps going back to the point that she and her mother's people had committed countless atrocities, and that she shouldn't act like a victim, but the simple fact is that Kaya's mother obviously had nothing to do with it. She was born and raised in that village, and she didn't contribute to any of the terrible things Gabby mentioned. Yet Gabby keeps going back to the point about past atrocities. But she herself starts to understand how ridiculous and irrational her point is. Falco then states the real reason why she was murdered, because she was simply caught up in an attack, and that she didn't do anything to deserve what happened to her. The scene is important because it exposed how this nationalistic herd mindset irrationally brackets and groups people, and how it completely overlooks the actual importance of each individual. Just as Falco stated, Kaya's mother didn't directly do anything which justified her death. It was simply for the sole fact that she was an alien on Paradis, and from the eyes of the Malians, including Gabby, that simple fact alone was enough to justify killing her. She was demonized solely for her nationality. This criticism is also highlighted in the way some characters are forcefully indoctrinated to carry on this endless cycle of hate. Just as Gabby had been brainwashed about her radical and extremified beliefs, Zeke and Eren had been done the same thing when they were raised by Grisha. There is also a pattern that the vital characters are the people who are able to look over this hate and see the characters just as individuals, which thus promotes the end of this type of hate. This further relates to why the restaurant scene where Gabby and Sasha's parents confront each other is so important. In this scene, Gabby is exposed by Niccolo that she was in fact the one who shot and killed Sasha on the airship. Niccolo offers a knife to Mr. Blouse, asking him to avenge his daughter, and that if he would not do it, he would do it himself. To this, Mr. Blouse puts down the knife and states that he thought he had let Sasha out of the forest, but that it turned out the World of War was just another larger forest where it was still about killing or being killed. The reason she died was because she wandered around the forest for too long. And he says that the children must be kept out of this forest in order to stop the circle of hate continuing. He knows that if he were to go through and kill Gabby, while it may provide some sort of revenge, he will just be continuing to do the exact same thing which led Sasha to die in the first place. So he simply forgives her. Contrary to the other people in the story who indoctrinated their own kids and the next generation to carry on this malice and disgust, Mr. Blouse consciously chose to disrupt this chain of events. He negates these hateful, nationalistic themes of the story to the extreme, and he represents one of the lessons and takeaway of Attack on Titan's story. Another big moral discussion obviously surrounds Eren's final decision in the last part of the story, particularly with the rumbling, but that topic is another long and important discussion which goes outside the scope of this video, so I will be making a separate video examining Eren's morality at the finale of Attack on Titan.